I liked the sense of kind of showing off his skills as an investigator here, right? So he's, in a way, I thought of this as like I'm taking this character who's a good investigator, right? He's been doing this job for a while. He's good. And I'm putting him in the situation where he has none of the things that he usually relies on to solve mysteries. He can't do fingerprints. He can't, test blood. He can't even really, there's no power. So he can't even really like properly inspect the crime scene. He's only got a flashlight, And so it was like, how is he gonna do this? And like, just how good is he? And so I wanted to kind of show that he has these kind of old fashioned investigative skills that are going to stand him in very good stead.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens, and as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. My hope is through these conversations, you learn about their craft and them as a person. You'll become like me, fiercely loyal, want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book, or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. Super excited because my guest today is Sarah Stewart Taylor. She is the author of the Sweeney St. George series set in New England, the Maggie D'Arcy series set in Ireland and Long Island, and Agony Hill and Hunter's Heart Ridge set in rural Vermont in the 1960s. Sarah has been nominated for an Agatha Award, the Dashiell Hammett Prize, the MWA Sue Grafton Memorial Award, and her mysteries have appeared on numerous Best of the Year lists, deservedly so. I will also add Sarah has received star reviews in Library Journal and Publishers Weekly, which as a librarian is the gold standard for my profession. And the stars are well earned since we read a lot and we tend to be a little bit discerning. A former journalist and teacher, she writes and lives with her family on a farm in Vermont where they raise sheep and grow blueberries. I've been an avid reader of Sarah's Maggie series and actually didn't want to read the last one because I didn't want it to end. Maggie is a great character. Thankfully, Sarah introduced me to a new character who is just as complex, Franklin Warren, who we'll talk about in the second book of the series, Hunter's Heart Ridge. Imagine my surprise when I was at a conference in Nashville about a year and a half ago, and there was Sarah standing in the common area. I did my best to contain my fangirlness. Authors who create series become as special as the characters they write, as those characters become our friends. Those of you who have favorite series will know exactly what I mean. Sarah was gracious, and to be in conversation with her is super cool. I'm so glad you're here to talk about Hunter's Heart Ridge, which is the second in this series.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for having me, Jen. I really appreciate it. I love these conversations. I love hearing from my favorite writers about sort of their inspiration and everything. And so I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. So you've written a couple different series. One's set in Ireland and Long Island, and now you have one set in Vermont, which is where you live, but you have taken us back to the 1960s. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you for this series and to set it in that particular time period?
Absolutely. So, I loved writing the Maggie books. I loved doing my research trips to Ireland. I loved sort of, being overseas in a way while I was working on those books. And I also became really conscious that there was a lot of inspiration right around where I live. That there were a lot of sort of mysteries and fascinating history that I could write about here as well. And so I think I'd had the story for Agony Hill in my head for a while. It sort of had been knocking around. And I finally decided that it was the time to try to write it. But the inspiration was really hearing stories from my family members, from my dad and his brother and sister who grew up here. So the inspiration for this series was really sort of looking around at the place that I live and getting fascinated by the history. And I sort of had this sense of wondering, why things in 2025, 2026 are the way they are. And as I started asking questions, I often came back to that period in the mid 60s and what was happening here during that period to kind of explain why we're dealing with all of these issues we're dealing with. And one of the things that I became really fascinated by was the construction of the interstates. Our region of New Hampshire and Vermont is called the Upper Valley. It's sort of a
Okay.
little self contained region on both sides of the Connecticut River. And we got not one, but two interstates that sort of come and cross here. And in 1965, when I set Agony Hill, Interstate 91 was approaching our region. And there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of fear, and there was also a lot of excitement about what this new interstate and who this new interstate would bring to our area. And so that's really where it started for me. That's where the inspiration for the series came from.
It's a great inspiration, and I'm always struck by things that are considered new or innovations, right? And how people react. There are people that are obviously early adopters and are on board and are excited for it. And then there are other people that are a little bit hesitant. And to see those two mash up, Franklin Warren is new in town, and he finds himself with that tension between the two, that it's the 1960s, things are happening, but at the same time, the community in which he lives is very much a farming community and kind of still in traditional ways of thinking and acting.
Yeah. So no, that's right. And I always love an outsider character. I'm so fascinated by the fish out of water, right?
Mhm.
Like I love somebody coming into town and seeing the things that the people who live there every day don't see. But I also love someone who is absolutely enmeshed in the life of the community. And so that's sort of where Franklin Warren and his next door neighbor, Alice Bellows, who grew up in the town and knows everybody and everything,
Right.
where that came from. I wanted kind of both of those characters.
Yeah. And it's great because he realizes that his next door neighbor Alice has a lot of the institutional memory of that place and kind of knows who people are and can kind of help make some introductions and explain some things and make him feel welcome. Early on in the book, she's getting ready to throw a dinner party, right? And I couldn't help but laugh in terms of her approach to throwing a dinner party because she talked about how important it was to get the seating, combine people in the right way in order to keep things interesting. It was all about balance and contrast. And you had to know who people were in order to combine them properly. And I think,
Yep.
what a thoughtful individual. She's very deliberate. And then somebody decides that they're in town and she invites him at the last minute and has to kind
Mhm.
of redo the seating arrangement, which I think, wow, how thoughtfully curated this is. Not just the meal and what she's serving and who she's serving it to, but where they're sitting in relation to one another.
Yes, and I mean, I think there is certainly she is a thoughtful person in that way, and she's also kind of she's kind of a professional entertainer. I think you would say that she had a marriage, a long marriage to a man who, was sort of on the surface kind of in foreign relations, but in fact was in the CIA. But she led this sort of Washington, D.C. society life and threw a lot of dinner parties. And so, she got good at it. But also, she is kind of an amateur sleuth. And so I think she loves mixing people up to see what conversations will come out of them sitting next to each other. And, she's very curious and nosy sometimes, maybe too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at one point she even describes it as a chemistry experiment, wanting to see. So, yeah, so thoughtful and I don't want to say manipulative, but she does certain things to elicit certain responses and to gain knowledge in a way that is rather, as you said, like an amateur sleuth, rather unassuming, which is really
Yes.
quite fun.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And this book is fantastic because you have a couple of different storylines that are happening. First of all, it's a series, so it's always good as a reader, at least for me, to kind of settle back into characters that I know and then meet some new ones along the way. But to see Sylvie back in the story and to see Franklin Warren and Alice, I mean, just terrific. But the other big part of the story is essentially a locked room mystery. There's an accident at the hunting lodge. And this is not your average hunting lodge with the community members. I mean, these are high profile individuals. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes. So the book, so Hunter's Heart Ridge, as you said, is the second book in the series, and it takes place about 3 months after the events of Agony Hill. And in Agony Hill, Franklin Warren has just arrived to take this job with the Vermont State Police, and he gets involved in this very confounding mystery. A farmer burns his barn down and is killed, and he becomes very suspicious of the farmer's neighbors and lots of people in town. After the events of Agony Hill, he kind of settles into town a little bit. And so 3 months later, at the beginning of Hunter's Heart Ridge, we find him feeling pretty good. In fact, the first scene in the book is he's in the general store in town, and he realizes that he could find anything he needs. Like, he knows the general store well now. And he's at the general store, and he walks home, and his deputy is waiting for him and says that they have to go out to this elite hunting club because there's been an accidental shooting. Of course, once he gets out there and starts investigating, it doesn't seem so accidental. And he realizes he needs to get in there and interview all of these very, prominent, important, powerful men before they leave or before evidence is hidden. And he and his deputy get there, and all of a sudden there's an early season snowstorm that kind of shuts all the roads, the power goes out, and they are trapped at this hunting lodge with a murderer and a whole bunch of suspects. And it's Warren's job to kind of sort that out before someone else gets hurt.
I find it really intriguing. He's as you said, it's 3 months in, he's comfortable. He sees his deputy and he's like, oh no, right? And then he relies on Pinky, his deputy, to kind of give him a little bit of background on this place because this is a little bit outside of town. And Pinky talks about like, oh yeah, my dad used to talk about this all the time, that presidents would go there and congressmen would go there and they line, there's photos of them around. So immediately Franklin's kind of, all right, this is kind of high profile and there's some discretion involved when you're dealing with high profile individuals. And then you talk about the snowstorm that comes in, and I'm thinking, wait a second, this is like 1960s. They don't all have the same tools that we have. I mean, the phone goes out. So what do you do? So the tension as a reader that just kind of amps up as the snow's falling and there's no phone service and you're stuck with somebody who killed somebody else in like essentially the same room. It's a little unsettling.
Yes, definitely. And it was actually really fun to research. I love doing the research for these books. And it was really fun to research sort of, how much snow would be needed to make the roads impassable in 1965. And I looked into sort of what were snowplows like in 1965. And what I found was people's cars just weren't as good on snow. Now we have 4-wheel drive and all season tires, and we have these like high clearance vehicles that you can drive through some snow. But rear wheel drive sedans, just you really were stuck in a situation like that where there was a lot of snow. And so that was kind of fun too, figuring out like, okay, how do I actually get them stuck at this lodge?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time that it's a rural remote community. So there aren't snowplows that are going by on these roads. These are kind of back roads that lead up, because the whole point of a hunting lodge is to be able to hunt. And you don't hunt where it's crowded. You hunt where there's open space and trees and snowbanks and all kinds of animals. So that to me was really kind of interesting. And at the same time, that snowstorm also incapacitates another family that's back.
Right.
With Sylvie and Alice. Talk a little bit about what it's like as a writer to balance multiple storylines. I think how hard it is as a writer when they say, "Give us your 60-second elevator pitch." And I'm thinking, you will need not just like an elevator, but like an elevator that goes to like the top of the Empire State Building like 3 times because the amount of nuances and layers, which is fantastic, but trying to describe it in 60 seconds is a challenge.
It is.
So,
I always find elevator statements a challenge. But yes, you're right. So there's sort of are these two stories unfolding at the same time. And while Warren and his deputy Pinky are stuck at the hunting lodge, Sylvie Weber, who is a character introduced in Agony Hill, she was the widow of the dead farmer, and she's pregnant in the first book, and is in the second book is heavily pregnant and about to give birth. And she just as the snowstorm hits, does in fact go into labor at home, and Alice Bellows happens to be with her and has to sort of step in and manage this situation because they can't get her to the hospital. And for this is a very challenging situation for Alice for a number of reasons. And of course, it's very challenging for Sylvie. And as I thought about these two storylines, I wanted to have this sort of connection between Warren and Sylvie because they have a connection. It's not clear yet exactly what the connection is, but there's something there. They feel pulled to each other on some level that they haven't quite figured out yet. And so as Warren is in this sort of dire situation in the snow and at the club, Sylvie is also in a very dire situation. And they think of each other. And in a way, they're sort of in each other's minds as they're in these very dangerous situations. And I liked that connection as a way to kind of build the structure of the book, that they each have to kind of overcome this terrible obstacle
right.
on their own, but they're thinking of each other.
Yeah. I think it's a very sweet, tender side of Franklin that we see. Because you think of, somebody who's, the detective in town is somebody who has to kind of compartmentalize because they kind of don't see always the greatest people on their best day. We'll just say that. And so I enjoyed that through line that they had to each other. And I think sometimes that comes from, when you see somebody at their worst, which he did when, in the first book, when her husband was killed and the barn was burning, you're kind of bonded to that person. There's something there that you can't always quite articulate. If we
Yes.
think back where you and I were during certain events in history and who we were with, those moments are special
Right.
and unique. I certainly enjoyed that. And then I'm thinking, there's Franklin and Pinky, and they're in a hunting lodge with a murderer. And what else is in the hunting lodge? But an entire room full of guns. So, then there's that tension that's just exacerbated. I hope there were some late nights where slept with the lights on because I wasn't quite sure when I went to sleep what might happen.
Would apologize, but I'm not going to apologize because that's the
That's
point.
what you want, right?
Right.
So, yeah. The layers and the nuances within the story, because this group that's together hunting has a shared history together, partly from just annual events going to the Hunter's Bridge to hunt, and for that camaraderie, that good old boys network, drinking whiskeys and scotches after the day. But then there's tension that's added because you added another generation in. You added one of the members' son who's, in school at Harvard, and his friend. So you have an older generation who, this is the 1960s and Vietnam is very much present. And so you have two generations. You have a generation that was around for World War II and understands what happened during that battle. And then you have this next threat and a younger generation, and they're at odds, and there's very heated discussions. So layering that in, I thought was a really great thing because it reveals a lot, I think, about people when there's
Yeah.
tension.
I'm glad you noticed that because that was one of the things that I really wanted to do with this book was to explore that generational tension that existed at this period in history. When I was interviewing people for my historical research, that was something that came up again and again and again. People would tell me, I protested the Vietnam War, and my dad was a World War II veteran, and we just could not get on the same page, at least at first. I think as the war went on, sometimes those dynamics shifted, which was really interesting. But I just had so many conversations with people who had dealt with that generational tension. And so I wanted to explore that. I wanted to kind of explore the idea of protest too, and when, the decision to protest and how people make that decision and how people make the decision not to protest. And that was sort of part of that exploration as well. And I really had fun with that, with the fathers and sons, and how they experienced war differently.
Absolutely. And if there wasn't for World War II a draft, people signed up, they had that sense of duty to serve their country versus Vietnam when it just depended on the number that was called as to whether or not you went to serve, which is incredibly different. So not having that same sense of agency that perhaps their fathers or other family members did is certainly different as well.
And I think too the sense of an enemy that everyone understood was the enemy, right? And there was something, even though of course war is never black and white, and there are nuances and complications in every situation, and even in World War II. But I I think I think that it was so widely supported, and of course that was not the case in Vietnam. And so it just brought up these rifts in families. And of course, the draft of course is a huge part of that there were people who went to war who didn't believe in the war. And it was a terrifying experience. I talked to so many men who just said, I was waiting for my number to come up, and I just, the way the lotteries worked, and you could feel the fear and anxiety that people had when they talked about that.
I think it's fascinating that your research, I mean, besides reading, I'm sure, involved real people and gathering their stories, which lent a real authenticity to the perspectives of the characters in your book. So how did you go about, I want to say recruiting, that's probably not the right word, encouraging people to share their stories?
Yeah, it's a great question because I used to be a journalist, and so I was in the business of asking people to share information and stories with me. And I always I then when I was a working reporter, and now as a fiction writer, I I've always feel nervous asking people for help, or to ask them to tell me their stories. I always feel like, am I getting their business? Am I being nosy? And the thing that I find almost every single time is that people love to talk about themselves, and they love to tell their stories. It's like we all are kind of waiting to be asked, in some ways, for our take on the world. And so when I would ask people to, and the questions I would ask were very open ended. It was sort of like, tell me what your family's life was like in 1965. Like, how old were you? Where were you living? What were you doing? And I got the most wonderful details and the most wonderful stories. People loved kind of taking that trip down memory lane and telling me about their lives. And so, yeah, I always tell other writers that it's nerve-wracking to ask for help, but you will almost always find a very willing participant when you do ask, because people love to talk about themselves and their lives.
Right. I think the other thing is you mentioned in there that one of the young ones who's the classmate of the son is very comfortable asking questions, very conversational. So I assume that comes from you and from how you've found it is to get people to talk about tough things.
Ooh, that's interesting. Right. So that character is a student journalist, and
Mhm.
he's a reporter, and so it sort of is his job. And that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about, like, how much of myself might I have put into that character. I think we always put a little bit of ourselves, and so yes, maybe he is a little bit me or parts of me.
Yeah, I think Franklin said about Seth, is his name, that he had the reporter's ability to make his questions seem conversational as though he were just being polite and asking.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And he's a very particular I see him as a very particular kind of journalist. I see this young man as someone who, may himself go to Vietnam as a reporter. And he is passionate about sort of uncovering the truth, and he will stop at nothing. And so yeah, he's going to do whatever he has to do to get his story.
So it's interesting. You have all these people, one of which who's a murderer, sitting in a room. They're all together, and and you amplify things with the tension of the war and the generations, and at the same time the unknown, because now they realize that their friend who they were out hunting with, some of them realize, some of them already know, was killed purposely, that it wasn't a hunting accident. And so I
That's
find
right.
that really interesting. And so then switching to make sure conversation people aren't aligning. I mean, this is not like Survivor where a couple of them go into another room and are talking while Franklin's interviewing somebody one on one to kind of get their history and in terms of what happened. And even Franklin's approach, he'll go and he'll ask questions. They're like, I already told you that. Why do I have to tell you that again? And he said, having witnesses repeat their vitals was a good warm up and gave Warren a sense of his subject.
Mm,
There's always, I think, God, was it Lincoln that said, tough times reveal character, they don't build it. And so seeing how
yes.
people react and how many of the people that he was talking to, those gentlemen who were there, friends for a long time, worked together for a long time in Washington in different capacities, to see them get frustrated or annoyed, or lying. And how do you know who's telling the truth?
Yes. Yeah, I liked the sense of kind of showing off his skills as an investigator here, right? So he's in a way I thought of this as like I'm taking this character who's a good investigator, right? He's been doing this job for a while. He's good. And I'm putting him in the situation where he has none of the things that he usually relies on to solve mysteries. He can't do fingerprints. He can't, test blood. He can't even really, there's no power. So he can't even really like properly inspect the crime scene. He's only got a flashlight. And so it was like, how is he gonna do this? And like, just how good is he? And so I wanted to kind of show that he has these kind of old-fashioned investigative skills that are gonna stand him in very good stead. And that's one of them. I'm so glad you highlighted that little moment because he's so attuned to how people answer even very simple questions like, "What's your address?" or "What's your name?" that it tells him something about their character.
Right. And there's a sense, and we learned this in the first book, that he's not working for a terrific guy. His boss just really doesn't quite understand him. And because he's relatively new here, he has this sense that he wants to prove himself. So he adds like additional pressure because I can't help it, as a reader, I'm cheering for him. I want him to do well. Right? Because I genuinely like him. And then the other thing you do in this story, and I won't say because I don't want any spoilers, right, is you layer in his backstory. You layer in his backstory of how he ended up here. He's a widower, which is incredibly sad. And yet the people in that room, I mean, it's kind of like wherever you go, there you are, recognize him. So
Right.
even though it's like 1965, there's
Yes.
so many different things colliding. I almost feel like it's like the middle of Paris where the Arc de Triomphe is and the Champs-Élysées, and cars are coming from every direction. I feel like that's how it is with this book. There's so many
Mhm.
different things happening at the same time.
I mean, I love to really like delve into character in
Mhm.
in my mysteries. And for me, a mystery is really satisfying, when it's sort of working on the level of like a plot that keeps you reading late into the night and that you're surprised by the ending, but also that as you get to know the characters, you really become part of their story and you really feel like you know them and you understand their motivation and their they have these complicated backstories that kind of come into the present in the book. And so yeah, I'm sure that there are some readers who might kind of think there's too much going on, but I love like a lot of layers to a story, and I love a lot of character development.
Absolutely. I mean, you do it
Absolutely.
with Alice too. I mean, there's a ton of character development and a backstory that is layered in here as well, which is wonderful. So, I guess a question for you is, do you know all of that backstory when you first start writing, or do you write the first book, have a general idea, and then kind of hone in more or drill down more to layer that backstory in?
Yeah, so it's both. I think some of the things about these characters I knew right from the beginning. I think I knew what Warren's backstory was and sort of why he ended up in this little town. I knew that right from the beginning. Alice, it's funny because Alice is a character who, initially she was going to be a smaller part of the story. And
Really?
yes, and I just as soon as I started writing about her, I just felt like, "Oh, I've got to give her equal billing," and I'm just fascinated by her. I love her. I want to know more about her. The backstory that you're referring to, I don't want to spoil that. I didn't realize that that was her backstory until probably halfway through writing this book. And it's for me, it was sort of a process of I always think it's like getting to know a new person. It's like making a new friend, getting to know them. It's like you sort of think, like, why is this particular issue such a big thing for her? Like I noticed that. I noticed she really reacts strongly when someone, whatever, tries to take her food or whatever.
Right.
And why is
Exactly.
that? Why doesn't she want anyone to share her dinner at a restaurant? And then you start asking questions and you get to know them, and this whole sort of background and a childhood and everything kind of emerges, and you understand why they are the way they are. And that was kind of how that particular plot line developed
So
in this book.
satisfying as a reader when you have that type of complexity and you get like, I think I mean, I love no matter what people write, they could write a post-it or grocery list and I would probably love it just as much. However, when you write a standalone versus a series, when you choose to write a series, allowing that character arc to develop and continuing to layer in their backstory to help us as readers understand kind of why they're doing what they're doing, and wondering if they're even aware of what they're doing. I always find really interesting in stories.
Yeah, and series, I love series. I sort of the first mysteries I fell in love with were series, and Dorothy Sayers, Lord Peter Wimsey, and Harriet Vane, and to be able to follow characters over multiple books and see them grow and change, and to have that feeling of opening a new book and sort of, I always like breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, I'm back with these people I love in this place I love. It's just the best. I just love it. But as a writer,
Aside from
it's
the fact that there are people being killed, but other than that,
true. Yes. Aside from that, as a writer, series are tricky because, of course, you start a series and you hope you'll, get to be Agatha Christie and write 60 or 70 of them, but you don't know. And so you kind of have to, it's like you have to have a bigger story, but then you also have to have smaller arcs that you can complete, and so that the reader is satisfied. And then you kind of have these bigger arcs that you hope you get to tell, but you might not. And so it kind of has to work on both of those levels.
right. I think, a lot of people listening will probably ask the question or have the question, do you have to read them in order? And I would say you don't. They stand alone. However, you get a better perspective if you start from the beginning. And considering this is the second, people have plenty of time to get caught up.
Yes,
Plenty of
that's
time.
right. Yeah,
Plenty of
and
time.
I'd say the same thing, that, like, you don't have to, but I think you get more out of the books when you do, you know?
Right. Yeah, there's enough of a reference back to something without it distracting from what's happening in the current book. But agreed. But it's that sense of of comfort in your books. Like now I can't wait. Please tell me there will be a third with Franklin Warren.
I really hope so. I have a story I want to tell, and I hope I can announce at some point that there will be another one. It's a little uncertain right now, but I hope to have good news for you.
Okay. Good. I like the fact that I can just kind of settle in with the characters and kind of get caught up on what's happening. I mean, thinking about Sylvie.
Yep,
Sylvie has 4 boys. Boys.
she's having her fifth. Well, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. And her husband has just died. They have a farm. She's holding down the farm herself with the boys' help, but she has a lot on her plate. She is,
And a
yeah.
dog.
And
Like
oh, that's right.
a relatively new dog.
They have a new puppy. Yes, it's a lot.
There's not enough chaos in that house. But yeah, but it just incredibly complex human characters because that's kind of what we are as human beings. We're not, all one thing or the other. That your characters are three-dimensional. They're not ever flat. And I just think
Good.
you have access to the same words I do, roughly, but you put them together in a way that creates these characters that like I really enjoy or really dislike or trying to figure out and understand them and would love to get invited to a dinner party that Alice throws.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, I wonder who she would seat, like who she would seat us next to.
Who she put us next to? And of course, it would depend who else was there, but
Who
that's
else
kind
is
of fun.
coming? It is fun. And then her attention to gardening, which is really
That's
cool.
very much something that I am into, as you know, and I often post about it on social media. But yes, I wanted to give her that passion of mine because I love it. I love writing about it.
Yeah, so those of you listening, follow Sarah on Instagram because her gardening is amazing. The flowers, absolutely spectacular. And not just like one or two. I mean, we're talking tons of them and bright, vibrant colors. Just amazing. I mean, I'm lucky I can keep plants alive. Not so good with the flower thing. So the other thing that's interesting is as a reader, language. Certain
Mhm.
expressions, certain phrases, certain sentences. And there's a sentence that Warren says because he has to make a phone call. Early on, he learns that there was a hunting accident, right? He learns who was killed and he ends up having to call his son. And he says something, no matter how many times he's done it, telling someone that their father or husband or aunt or friend was no longer among the living took a sliver of his humanity.
Yeah.
And I was just
Yep.
like, yeah, I mean, it can't be an easy thing. I mean, we come to expect it when we read crime books or we watch, a mystery, but what that does to that person who's actually delivering that news to be able to see it from that perspective was thoughtful. And I'm imagining intentional that you did that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love crime fiction, and I think we, as readers of crime fiction, we do. I mean, we kind of joke sometimes about all the death and all the bodies, and and it is, it is kind of a fun thing about the genre. But I do, as a writer, it's really important to me to also remember that what we're writing about, and the fact that the families of people who actually have been murdered have a very specific set of circumstances and experiences, and it's really important to me to honor that on some level, even though these are fictional people, and so kind of exploring that through my detectives is, I think is the way that I do that, that they take it very seriously.
Right.
As they
And it's neat. It's neat because he's teaching and he's, a mentor to the deputy Pinky and kind
Mm,
of trying to impart what he knows and how to, read a scene, in terms of, what's going on, what looks normal, what looks out of place, even people's body language, is it congruent with what they're saying? So it's really neat to see that aspect of him as well.
mm,
Sometimes, people sometimes have egos and don't want to share what they've learned, with others. And to see him doing that, I think is another sign of what he's a good guy.
yeah. Yeah, and Pinky, I really, the character of Pinky was another character who sort of grew on me. I like I liked kind of making him he's like the young trooper who just has an affinity for solving mysteries. Like he's good at it on some level, and Warren recognizes that, and so makes him his assistant. And of course, in this book, Pinky is also the object of somebody's romantic interest, and I I had fun with that because he's kind of an awkward guy. He's kind of gawky,
Hmm.
and he blushes. He has trouble. He's like a habitual blusher, and so you always know when he's feeling awkward and embarrassed. And but there's a young woman in the book who just thinks he's the most handsome thing to
Hmm.
ever walk the earth, and I really enjoyed like giving Pinky
Absolutely.
that situation, you know.
I know, and she won't even call him Pinky, it's Walter, his real name, not his nickname, which is really kinda sweet. So, but yeah, an interesting cast of characters, even things talking a little bit about language and capturing what things are like. You talk about when people came inside that bringing the gray smell of the outdoors with them.
Mm.
Just everybody knows, hopefully, those who have experienced snow, because there might be people listening who've never seen it. You and I have seen our fair share. But there is a certain smell to the outdoors associated with snow. Like, you can even
Yeah,
smell when snow's coming. It sounds kinda ridiculous. Some people will know what we're talking about.
absolutely. Yeah, it's like that sort of metallic smell, and it just always to me it's a gray. It's gray, you know. It has that sort of very, yeah, sort of metallic feeling to it.
Kind of, yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that I think that you do so well, I mean, not only are you weaving several different layers and storylines that are kind of crossing and intersecting in great ways, but you also capture the ordinary things that we've all done, which, you talk about them getting in the car and holding their hands over the heating vents. No, it's just one of those things that, sometimes writers get so caught up in the complexity of the crime and what they're writing, but forget that these are still people that need to eat. They're still people that need somewhere to sleep, even when it's cold, like warming their hands over the vent. I mean, we all do it. You can see it without even thinking, which I think is really kind of fun.
Yeah, thank you for noticing that because those details are those are some of my favorite things about writing a book, is putting those things in. And I think those are the things that kind of ground your reader in a created reality, where that they feel like, okay, I'm there. And I think it's really important, both as a reader, but also as a writer, because once I figure out some of those little details, I feel like I understand my characters better, like knowing that they live in a place where when they get in the car, it's absolutely freezing for the first, like, 5 or 6 minutes,
Yeah,
probably even
no.
more in 1965. It was probably like the first 15 minutes.
Right.
Mm. That tells you something about the character and who they are and how they interact with the world. So, yeah, those little I love finding those little details too
Me
that you
too.
can put in.
I like look for them in books. I'm like, okay, like I get it. I feel like I'm with them, that I'm kind of sitting in the back seat. I know it's a truck, but like kind of like my head would be between the two of them in the front seat and the driver's seat. Like, all right, let's go.
Yeah.
So those are certainly fun touches that you add and humanize the story, even though there's, crimes committed.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's great. And I absolutely love the cast of characters and the caretakers that have been taking care of the hunting lodge for, many, many years. And that was kind of a tradition that was passed down from somebody else, and making sure that there's firewood and making sure that there's, beds made and making sure that there's food and meals prepared. I mean, the people who would go hunting, I mean, they wanted for nothing. Like everything was catered to what they could possibly want, need when they need it. So,
Yep. Yep. And
you know,
they are the kind of men who, if they want that, they can pay for that and they can have it. And I was interested in sort of exploring that the dynamic between the people from outside who come to this rural area and the people who live in the rural area and kind of are, make their living serving the summer people or the hunters. And I think I live somewhere where that dynamic exists very much. There are a lot of summer communities around here and a lot of tourism and so it's just I'm fascinated by that dynamic.
Right. Yeah, there's so many different dynamics and they all play well and against one another in this story. It's so hard sometimes, I realize when I'm talking to mystery writers to not want to spoil anything or give anything away.
It's hard, isn't it?
It it is really hard. I'm like, thank goodness this is just audio that they can't see my facial expression when I'm talking to you about certain things. Um, Gosh, I would talk to you like the rest of the evening. This has been a great conversation. So as we wrap up, this is Stories End, the final 5 questions.
Okay.
So you live on a farm, right? We already told people, make sure you follow on Instagram for gorgeous photos from flowers to sheep to the baby sheep. They're just so stinking cute. So since you live on a farm, what is your favorite task or chore and your least favorite?
Ooh, good question. I love collecting eggs. I love collecting eggs. There's something about it. It's like Easter every time I go into the chicken,
Right.
it's like I love it. And my least favorite, hands down, is mucking out the barn, shoveling sheep manure. At the end of the winter, it's like 6 inches, 10 inches thick. And, just got to put your back into it, get in there, get it out. That's my least
Yeah.
favorite.
That would be my least favorite too, for sure. So Hunter's Heart Ridge has like a story associated with it that there was a gentleman who fell in love with a woman, right,
Mhm.
who lived
Yep.
there, and her dad didn't really approve of him, and he kind of wouldn't leave the area, kind of didn't take too well to the fact that she did not love him or was permitted to be with him. Kind of went a little bit, I don't know, insane as a result. And so a bunch of people decide, like, we got to get this guy out of here. And they end up finding somebody's heart. And they just assume it, like, oh, like one of our guys got him, surrounded, killed him, and here's his heart. And turns out it was one of the people that were in the hunting party, right? Urban legend.
So yeah, it's kind of a legend that people in this area tell, and it's from many years before, so it's a little unclear exactly whether it's true or not, exactly what happened. But it's dark, and in some ways it kind of informs the way people see this landscape and the way they look at this area of mountainous forest. And I love those kinds of legends. I just really love the sense of like there are these stories that people have told for a long time. We don't know if they're true, but there's something in them, right? There's some kernel of truth in it. So yeah.
Very Edgar Allan Poe. Very much so. Creepy. Favorite snow activity.
I actually love snowshoeing. I really love snowshoeing. I mean, there's, obviously skiing is really fun and I love sledding. My kids are all big teenagers and early 20s now, but I still, if they'll go sledding with me, it makes me so happy. But I love snowshoeing. There's something about snowshoeing that it's so peaceful in the woods, and it's just like a way to kind of get out places where you can't walk because the snow's so deep. So yeah, I'll say snowshoeing.
I was hoping you would say that because that features in this book, and I've never snowshoed.
Yep.
And so I was fascinated to learn about how you actually do it so you're gliding and not sinking. Because I have a feeling if I were to put on snowshoes, I would take a step and go down and then like not be able to get up again. But you kind of, if you're have the cadence right, it's like you float across the snow. So
Yeah. And if the
it sounded
conditions are
it
right.
sounded beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's really it's fun.
And
I
the
love it.
quiet, like the snow seems to kind of envelop that quietness, which is even better.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Do you ever read the end of a book first?
No, I would never do that. That if nothing else, it's funny. I think some people say, absolutely not because they don't want to ruin the story. For me, it's more about thinking about the author and how much time, it takes so long to write a book and my goodness, like years sometimes. And I could never do that to the author. I could never skip it.
So so like when I tell you like I binge your books in like a weekend or like a couple days, does that frustrate you because it took
No,
you
I
so
love
long to
that.
write them? Okay.
No,
When
I
I'm
love
having
that because
cereal for dinner because I don't feel
yeah,
like cooking because I can't put the book down?
that's what I want. I mean, that's
Okay.
when someone is so involved in the story that they can't stop reading, like, that's what you're going for. That's what you want.
Okay. Well, you
So,
can
yeah,
check that
that's
off your list for all your books
that's
because
great.
that's me. Yeah. And then the final question, what song is always on a road trip playlist?
Oh my god. It's so funny when people say, like, "What's your favorite book?" or "What's your favorite song?" I who love books and love music, like, absolutely draw a blank, but I should be able to think of a good one. Let's see. It's funny, we've been listening to a lot of, like, old Simon& and Garfunkel in our house lately, and The Boxer, I think, is a great road trip song, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think The
Yeah, it's so
Boxer is
funny
a
as a librarian, like people will ask me what I'm reading and I have the same exact thing. And Nancy
it's just
Pearl,
really
who yeah, it's exactly right. It's like, oh, I have no idea what I'm reading. I don't know. Nancy Pearl, who's a librarian, has her own action figure. She's phenomenal. But she used to say every time she was like interviewing a writer or she was doing an event, she would write the name of the book on the palm of her hand because she
yes.
knew that when she would get asked that, what book are you currently reading or what's on your nightstand or some variation of that, she said her mind would go blank. So she just learned to write it on the palm of her hand so she wouldn't forget, which I think genius. So
I I actually have a friend who's a writer and we talked about that, and she said that she would just every time someone asked her, she would say War and Peace because it was actually believable that she would be reading War and Peace for multiple years, and it was just always on her
Anna
mind, like,
Karenina.
favorite book, War and Peace. What are you reading? War and Peace.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you to those of you who are listening. An even bigger thank you to you, Sarah Stewart Taylor, whose latest book, Hunter's Heart Ridge, is now available in paperback. So if you're looking to travel to Vermont and experience the challenges of a small town that they face in the 1960s, this is the book for you. If you're looking for a locked room mystery set in a hunting lodge during a snowstorm, which has you questioning each character's statements to Warren, this is the book for you. If you're looking for a book which is part of a series starring a detective who has a complex backstory which continues to be revealed in each story, this is the book for you. To find out who else is visiting, go to StoryToCount.com. This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba.
Thank you so